So you're all very welcome to this an introduction to soft fruit growing in Ireland. So this is just a very short webinar specifically aimed at anybody that has an interest in growing berry crops. So some of you may not know me. My name is Eamonn Kehoe. I am the Soft Fruit Advisor and researcher with Teagasc. My advisory office is where I'm sitting now. That's in Johnstown Castle in the not so sunny southeast this evening. And my research is based in Ashtown Research Centre in Dublin. So you're very welcome. So for any of you that don't have a background in soft fruit growing, I'm going to give you a nice introduction and a nice historical background to the industry. Okay, so I started in Teagasc in 2000. So kind of everything I'm talking about, we probably go back about 10 years back into the 90s and then up till this year. So when I began with Teagasc, the industry was worth about 4 or 5 million euro, and today it's worth about 45 million euro farmgate. So the growth has been huge, and on a compound annual growth rate, it works out at about 11.2%. So even during the recession years, the financial crisis and so on, the industry still grew away. People still bought berry crops, and berry crops have become a typical part of people's shopping basket now, and people are buying berries all year long. Irish berries probably for about 9 months, and for the other parts of the winter time, a lot of berries are imported from Morocco and Spain and countries like that. So when I talk about berries in Ireland, strawberry is primarily the main berry crop that's grown. 90% of the soft fruit crop grown in Ireland would be primarily strawberry. So that's the real bread and butter crop. The minor fruits, including raspberries and blackberries and blueberries and so on, are important for some specific people, but a lot of the strawberry growers, some of them anyway, are growing those berry crops alongside, primarily aimed at increasing their profit, but giving a range of products for the supermarket customer, whoever the customer is. So there's been continued expansion every year, very big on-farm investment, and the growers do get help from the Department of Agriculture Horticulture Grant Scheme, which is a brilliant scheme. Just to mention it very briefly, it's for new equipment, new capital costs, and the scheme pays up to 40% of the capital costs involved. If you're under 35, you get 50%. Now, person applying for that, you have to have the business in your own name, or whoever has a business in their own name, they have to apply for it. That scheme runs so far every year, and it runs, begins in November. It's launched in November, and the closing date is usually just before Christmas. So if you're interested, please keep that in the back of your mind. Right, that's that bit over with. So just to give you a historical precedent, you often wonder, you hear people talking about Wexford berries, Dublin berries, Meath berries. Well, the primary reason why we started growing strawberries in Wexford, for example, and in County Meath and in Dublin and parts of Louth was because we have what's known as an acid brown earth soil. And if I move the cursor around all this yellow area, these are acid brown earth soil. So Wexford, particularly around the Enniscorthy area here is an acid brown earth soil. They're soils that are derived from shale. And the most important thing about those soils is they release huge amounts of potassium, which is an element that strawberry crops or berry crops really use in huge amount. And up in County Louth, there's also a lot of acid brown earth soils, and in parts of Waterford and other areas as well. So back in the 50s, actually, after World War II, from the 40s, from 1938 on, a lot of British companies came over to Ireland looking for strawberry growers, basically, to grow processing strawberry crops for British jam makers, including the likes of Robertson's, Hartley's, Chivers UK. And after a while, then Chivers Ireland was established. And there was a huge industry in County Wexford and other parts of Meath and parts of County Louth growing strawberry crops for jam makers. So in Wexford alone, there was something like 250 small growers at one stage back in the 60s and the 70s. And my generation, we were all, when we were kids, we were all strawberry pickers, basically. Didn't do us any harm. But that was that era. So that's kind of where the tradition has come from. The tillage soils, the grey brown podzolic soils here in here in brown and blue, they actually hold a lot of potassium. They don't release it, so they're not anything as good to use. So that's the historical precedent to it. Today, this is actually just a picture back from the 80s actually, and this was the way strawberries were grown back in the 80s. And the funny thing about it is the season lasted for just 6 weeks. So you were talking really primarily season during June and July. The strawberries were all grown in the soil, obviously, down on a bed and on the flat. And all these strawberries, the varieties back then were known as Cambridge Vigor and Cambridge Favourite. They were all actually British bred varieties. And they were all grown for chivers and for the other jam makers. So after a while, the Dutch variety, which is a fresh variety, Alsanta, arrived into the country in the 80s. And growers that were growing for processing began to grow some of the Alsanta crops. So there was the beginning of a crossover into the fresh market. And then when that happened, people began to produce strawberries on beds like this or ridges that were covered in black plastic. All the plants were planted into the black plastic. And this was a model that was used for 20, 30 years. The wires over the actual beds were cloche wires, and not in the picture was the polythene they were actually covered with. So all of these crops were covered in polythene for protection. So this was the model that was used for a long time. Following on from that, then I began to see this when I started with Teagasc in 2000. People began to cover the beds in a plastic known as Mypex. Then they started to introduce substrates for growing strawberries. So they grew the strawberries in peat bags of various descriptions, put those peat bags up onto the beds and cover those with the polythene again. Now, the only difference here is if you look really closely, there are actual fertigation lines or irrigation lines going into each bag. So all the actual bags were fed using different types of feed. So growers were slowly moving away from the soil. That's really the message here. So that system lasted for a while. It was temperamental, and the plants got a lot of root diseases for different reasons. And we then moved over quickly to what's known as tabletops. So this is the system that's really used today. So all of a sudden, the strawberries were moved from the ground up into the air, and they were put on gutters like this. This was the newer version of tabletop brought in mid-2000s. And people made lots of different types of tabletops as well. Essentially, it's just a steel system or post and wire to keep the strawberry bag, which contains peat, up away from the ground. And obviously, this system makes picking much faster for the farm, and the quality of the fruit was much better. There's less pests, less diseases. Everything really improved. And the gravity, putting the bag up onto the actual gutter, helped a huge amount in terms of reducing different types of plant diseases, root diseases, and so on. Now, if you look in the background, you see the tunnel, the little cloche that I showed you earlier on has suddenly been replaced now with what's known as a tunnel or a Spanish tunnel. And those tunnels were introduced primarily to grow fruit in the middle part of the season. So the early part of the season now is the fruit is grown in heated glass houses. Then that's followed on with cold glass houses. And then the Spanish tunnels you see in the middle of this picture, they're essentially used from mid-May until the late autumn time. Then the grower goes back to the cold glass house. And then at the end of the season, they go back to the warm glass house. So that's kind of part of how the season is extended. Actually, this picture is taken on the farm, Kearns Fruit Farm near Curragreig in County Wexford. And they are very big fruit grower, very progressive growers. And this area here where I'm moving the cursor, the rest of the field now actually is filled with tunnels. And actually, this is their glass house built during the 2008-2009 financial crisis. The glass house was put up, and beautiful glass house, 1 hectare in size. And Jimmy and Susan grow strawberries in there now, primarily for the early part of the season and the late part of the season. But we have a new variety now, and that can actually be grown all year in the glass house, and it crops for various technical reasons all year. So suddenly we've moved from the cloche. You can see we've moved from cloches to tunnels, now to heated glass, and heated glass is really the beautiful system to grow in if you've got the land, if you've got the capital to invest in it. Most of the heated glass in Ireland for strawberry production, there aren't that many people doing it. There's only a handful of people doing this sort of production. They're either heating the glass with gas, which has been an extremely scary exercise this year. And some people are also using different biofuels as well. And this is the inside of the glass house. And you're looking at a crop that would have been planted in January time. So you can see just at the bottom of the slide, the season now lasts from 8 to 9 months, from March to November, compared to 6 weeks. So you can see the progress is quite extraordinary. Like, we spend a lot of our time as well traveling the world and traveling specifically to Holland to learn from Dutch growers, and we find them absolutely fantastic. We learn a huge amount, and a lot of the technology in the glasshouse, we would have traveled ourselves. I would have traveled with the growers, gleaming that knowledge and transferring it onto them. So this glasshouse produces for the early part of the season and for the late part of the season, and in specific cases, they can actually produce all year. And this is just a crop inside the glasshouse. So everything in there, all the irrigation, all the feeding is controlled by a computer system. And that crop at the moment is just coming into flower. You can see the little white flowers on the tabletops. Right, moving on swiftly. So for 40 years, we grew a variety called El Santa, which was a lovely variety. But very swiftly, about 6 or 7 years ago, a variety called Malin Centenary arrived on the scene. And El Santa was gone, pretty much 90% gone within a couple of years. And Malin Centenary was bred by my colleagues in East Malling, in the research station in East Malling. In fact, a lot of our varieties over the years were produced by the East Malling research station. And that station has been around over 100 years. So that's why the variety is called Malin Centenary. And it was actually, they celebrated their centenary a number of years ago, and that's where they chose the name, and they presented a bowl of the strawberries actually to one of the royal family. So centenary is absolutely a beautiful berry. It has over 90% class 1 fruit. Compared to El Santa, people may have been struggling picking at kind of 70% class 1 fruit. So centenary is just superb. The quality, the flavor, the look of the fruit. The fruit looks like gemstones. It's fantastic variety and has taken off by a huge amount. And this is just another shot of Malin Centenary in kind of biodegradable punnets. So centenary arrived, and suddenly we had to learn very fast how to grow it. We all made loads of mistakes because we were just learning in terms of the nutrition, picking, spraying, looking after it, biocontrol, everything. This is our research glasshouse. This is one of the units I do research in the glasshouse in Ashtown in Dublin. And all of the work actually done on strawberry so far has been on increasing the knowledge in terms of nutrition, specifically planting dates, substrates, and the timing of planting dates and so on. Very applied stuff that the grower really benefits from. So the whole purpose of the advisor and research work is to increase the efficiency and the productivity for the grower, and thus increase their income and keep their income protected. So this is one of the trials myself and my colleague Leo and my other colleagues up there were working on over the last year. This was actually a fertilizer trial. And in this trial, we actually found out that you could reduce the fertilizer by up to 50% without affecting any of the quality or the actual the crop yield. This is just another shot of a plant density. So the growers plant specific plant densities for their yield. And at the start, you don't quite know how many plants per square meter to plant. And this was also a nutrition trial that I just mentioned there as well. So all of the growers, specifically in glass and tunnels, they use very, very little sprays. In fact, for a couple of years in our glasshouse in Ashtown, we didn't use any sprays because the environment inside the glasshouse is so good, so dry, the air buffering capacity, everything, all the environmental characteristics are brilliant in an environment like this. Now, we do use biological control, which is a system where you use basically insects to eat other insects, and that works works very well in glass specifically because the environment is so stable. It's a really, really lovely way to grow a crop. These are night break lights. These are lights that actually you install in a glass house to trick the plant into thinking it's after getting a specific amount of cold. So a lot of fruit crops, including centenary, need a lot of cold units, basically frost or chilling units, and that can be replaced to a large extent by using these LED lights during the January and February and March period. And the growers are extremely environmental conscious. Sustainability, it's not a new word to us. We've always used and collected a lot of runoff water from crops. Most growers now actually collect all of the water and all of the fertilizer that may run off a crop. And in some cases, they're beginning to either use that runoff for other crops, including potatoes, for example. And one or two people now are installing or have already installed systems where they can recirculate all of the water and all of the feed that was used in a strawberry crop. And none of that stuff goes down anywhere near any groundwater. And this is just a picture of an ultraviolet system that was installed not so long ago that actually cleans the water that comes off the strawberry crop, so that the water that's been reused on the crop is safe to use. So the technology being used is pretty immense. This is just a shot of some Malin centenary at one of the trials in Ashtown. So I have 2 units in Ashtown, and I do different trials in both units. One is a cold unit where there's no heat, so you can do largely 60-day trials, which is really suitable. So just to mention and give you an idea of how you extend the strawberry season. So you can have different structures, glass, polythene, and so on, to stretch the season out. But one of the main ways of doing it is by using what's known as a 60-day plant. And essentially all of the stock, this is actually a little tray plant, it's a strawberry plant. The vast majority of the plants are produced in Holland. Now we tried doing it in Ireland and it was difficult because our climate isn't entirely suitable to produce the plants. So most of the stock is bought in from Holland and the UK. So this is a strawberry plant, and essentially they're harvested in Dutch nurseries, which we often visit in November and December. They're harvested by a number of different companies to put into crates. And the crates you're looking at then are put into the cold store for different periods from a month to 6 months. So to extend the season, the plants are literally delivered to Ireland, taken out of the cold store, and planted at various planting dates. And roughly, if I planted the plant today, it will crop within 60 days. So that's where the idea is the 60-day plant came from. Now, the theory has gone out the window a tiny bit because it all depends on what's happening with the weather. So sometimes you take the plant out, it crops in 40 days, and then another time you take it out and it crops in 70 days. But that's essentially the technology that's used to extend the season. We plant up various trials in Ashtown. This is just a few slides looking at how you actually go about doing this. So a lot of people are producing strawberry crops in bags with different substrates, either cocoa peat or peat moss, which are 2 excellent substrates. Those bags you can buy in and plant straight away, but some other larger growers also use this black trough, which is a little bit like a window box. And they plant into those. And just for various reasons, you can save a few bob planting this way. There's pros and cons of either system, but if you're a small producer, ideally you're better off just buying the bags in and planting into the bags. So this was the crop that was going in May and June in our glasshouse in Ashtown. And just to prove it, there's no picture of me actually planting them, but that was me there planting them with one of my colleagues. So the plants are put into this trough, and in the glasshouse, they cropped in about 45 days. So what we were actually doing in this little trial was seeing the effect of planting dates in May and June, what effect it had on the yield and on harvest dates and so on. And we actually found that if you planted past about the 10th of June, the yield then fell off a cliff face, which was really good information to give the grower. The yield just went down extremely quickly once you went past the 10th of June. People were used to planting at Santa much later, and with this variety, you just can't do that for different reasons. And that was the trial planted in the glasshouse in Ashtown. You can see all the little tubes going into each trough. They're all irrigation lines or fertigation lines. Every time the nutrients and the water are supplied to the plants through an irrigation system, what's known as a 2-tank system. And that's just a standard piece of kit that all the producers would have. But this is another tabletop system that we got from a Dutch company, actually, that was installed just a few years ago. Now, just to mention, you do not have to go off and spend vast amounts of money on all of this, the most expensive tabletop systems. You can actually make your own. You can. I know one individual who makes all of his own tabletops, and he does it really efficiently and very cheaply. So you don't have to spend vast amounts of money. A lot of people don't have vast amounts of money. So you can start off with a very basic system. So if you want to talk to me about it, I can fill you in. And this is just a crop in Ashtown. And this was a plant density and another planting date trial. You see the fruit is fantastic. Very few misshapen fruit. Lovely, lovely, lovely variety. The growers, including ourselves, we use a lot of biological control, which is a method of introducing predatory insects to eat various pests that affect strawberry crops. And this is an interesting thing. This is called a banker pot system, where you actually buy in a cereal plant in a container, and the cereal plant is covered in cereal aphids. You plant that up into the strawberry crop and feed it the same way as one of the troughs you see in the picture. And about 2 weeks later, then you bring in a little parasitic wasp called Incarsia. You pour that and leave it onto the actual banker pot, and it starts basically laying eggs into the aphid on top of the banker pot system. Maybe another week or two, more little wasps come out, and those wasps all start attacking any aphids on the strawberry crop. So it's a brilliant system of integrated pest management that works really well. Yeah, this was just a very short article. There's a lot of work going on at the minute around the world on different robots, and the robots, this is an article I wrote for Horticulture Connected, and it was about the Agribot, actually. It's one, and this company actually has 2 different robots. They probably have 3 now at this stage that can actually harvest strawberries from tabletops. Around the world, in all different lines of horticulture, there are different robots being developed, and they're being developed a lot faster than a lot of us would have actually thought, because labor is the biggest cost. It's at least 40% of the cost of, say, running a strawberry farm, and the labor cost is huge. And trying to employ people is really, really difficult. And most people rely on Eastern European workers and getting permits for Eastern European workers to work. So it's difficult, and a lot of robots are actually being developed, and there's different prototypes, and there's actually different commercial ones now as well. So I'd say within the next 10 years, there's going to be major advances. I'd say most of them will actually be used as well in very, very flat surfaces, for example, in the likes of the glass house you saw. So just moving on quickly, the minor fruits. And this is a lovely crop of Glenample raspberries. So just to mention, there are some people that are growing raspberries only, but the vast majority of people have kind of a mix. They're primarily strawberry, and then they might have some raspberry and blackberry as well. And there's some people growing blueberries, but blueberries need a very, very acidic environment, and it's a bit more difficult to do. But anyway, this is a crop of protected raspberries. In the past, people used to maybe plant raspberries and get 8 or 9 or 10 years of production from them. That really doesn't happen anymore. And what people are doing now is they're buying in, not everybody, but a lot of people are buying in the raspberry cane from a Dutch producer that literally comes out of a cold store, very much in the same way that the strawberry plant comes out of the cold store. They plant that into a substrate or a pot, and then they get one crop, chuck the cane, and repeat the process. Now, this actually is a crop that was grown in soil, but it's the producer no longer does this. He actually grows in substrate too. There's a lot of management and labor costs and pruning costs, and risk of maybe some root diseases in overwintering canes. And that's primarily the reason people are just using what's known as the long cane raspberry and taking one crop off it and then just throwing it out and replanting. Just to mention as well, raspberries are absolutely a beautiful fruit. Most of the varieties that have been bred over the years have come from the UK, primarily from what's known as the James Hutton Institute now, or what was primarily called the SCRI. This is a crop of Glen Ample, which was bred in Scotland. And we were delighted a few weeks ago, I was delighted to have Nikki Jennings, who's the breeder in the James Hutton, and highlighting her new variety. So a few people, including ourselves, next year are going to try out some of the new varieties. So this was raspberry, and they have if they're grown in the substrate as well, they have a training system. Not too difficult to grow. One variety that's very popular in Ireland that's absolutely beautiful is Tulameen. It's Canadian and it's from British Columbia. Lovely big fruit, reasonable shelf life. And Glen Ample is another variety that's beautiful, and the shelf life on both of these isn't as good as some of the new varieties coming from the States, but the flavor in these two and the quality is just absolutely superb. And this is just a crop of blackberries, another variety, it's another crop that's grown alongside usually strawberries, raspberries, blackberries. This is a variety called Loch Ness. And another variety that's in the same site is Loch Tay. So they're all Scottish bred varieties. And the beauty about that is if a variety is coming from Scotland and its germplasm is mostly Scottish, it has a good chance of doing well here compared to people trying out Californian varieties and Florida varieties and Mexican varieties. And this is just one of the final products. This is a punnet of lovely Irish strawberries produced by Jimmy Kearns and in a Dunstores punnet. So like just to mention, a lot of the bigger producers, of course, sell fruit to supermarket chains, but there are also other opportunities selling on the roadside. The roadside is a huge trade, and to local shops. And just to mention as well that if you're in a part of a country that's got no other fruit producers, there is a huge opportunity for you to get involved in this, because people really demand local produce. And if they can get local produce produced locally, they will buy it and support you. So if you're in the west of Ireland and there's nobody you don't have any competition, you should seriously think about it. So just to mention and to finish up, all of the webinars we have done in our horticultural department and I've done are put up onto the horticulture website, which is easily found on the Teagasc website. And my colleagues in nursery stock, the vegetable team, myself and soft fruit and mushroom, all our webinars are up there for you to devour, basically. And if you have any other information, I know I've been speaking to some of you on the call tonight, please contact me. My email address is eamon.kehoe@teagasc.ie, and my mobile number is there. But all these details are up on the Teagasc website as well. And this is a shot of an absolutely beautiful crop of Malin centenary grown in County Wexford. I took this picture last week. And actually the picture doesn't do what I saw justice, but it was just fantastic crop of strawberries. And you see there's not a misshapen one to be seen. Okay, thanks very much for